I just want to, like all the other speakers, thank Randy and the Natural History Museum for putting this fantastic little symposium together. It's fun to have all these experts on the KPG boundary together, and I'm learning a lot myself. So I'm going to talk about the KT boundary, the KPG boundary, not up in the northern part of North America, but in New Mexico. And we're interested in understanding the collapse of the dinosaur-dominated fauna at the end of the Cretaceous. And there's a lot of studies that suggest that maybe dinosaurs were already declining towards the end of the Cretaceous. So this is a recent study, 2016. Dinosaurs already in decline. Here's another one, Brusati et al., showing that some dinosaurs seem to have been maybe going down in diversity, at least in morphological disparity, which is kind of the number of different body types, right before the end of the Cretaceous. So, I mean, were dinosaurs on the way out? Here's a study that I had a part in, and it's kind of a mixed bag. Some dinosaurs seem to be increasing in diversity, at least in the number of species, while others seem to be declining. I mean, where do these numbers come from? And as you've already heard, North America has the best record in the world for this interval of time, this very special interval of time, especially the northern part of the western interior. Some people call this the Northern Great Plains region. But there's actually other localities along the western interior, along the western margin of the Western Interior Seaway, including, well, we talked about the Denver Basin briefly. There's actually a site in central Utah, the North Horn Formation, where there seems to be latest Cretaceous vertebrates. There's the San Juan Basin, which I'm going to talk about, but there's even one farther south, central New Mexico, and then one way down in West Texas. However, the San Juan Basin appears to have just about the most diverse vertebrate fauna from the latest Cretaceous of Western North America that's falling outside of the Northern Great Plains region. And unfortunately, this area is restricted to a relatively small geographic area along the western edge of the outcrop belt. A lot of this is found within the Bistaydinazin wilderness area. And this is pretty much what the stack of rocks looks like, the strata. We have Lake Campanian Kirtland Formation. The Nacimiento is the member I'm going to focus on today. It's just this narrow band of sediments, and it actually looks very much like the underlying Kirtland Formation. There's a basal conglomerate, and it's that light tannish area that's kind of well vegetated. It's sort of a conglomeratic unit. And then above that is the Ojo Alamo Sandstone, which is a sheet sandstone. And I'll talk a little bit more about these units coming up. And the Nacimiento member has an erosive base, so it seems to be sitting unconformably on the underlying Campanian age sediments, which are about 10 million years older than the boundary. And here I am. This picture is standing on top of the Ojo Alamo Sandstone, looking down on the Nacimiento member. So this sheet sandstone that I'm standing on has petrified logs and trees, and it actually has a Paleocene flora, and there's Paleocene pollen in it. So there doesn't seem to be any doubt that this sheet sandstone, anyway, is Paleocene in age. In fact, there's huge logs in it. This is a tree lying prone that's about 100 feet in length. So there obviously were large forests that were occupying the landscape when this sheet sandstone was deposited. And above the sheet sandstone, there's also a thick section of early Paleocene sediments. This is the Nacimiento Formation. And there's several hundred feet of very fossiliferous sediments containing lots of mammal fossils. And in fact, this is arguably the best place in the world to look at the rise of mammals spanning the next 4 million years after the boundary. But I'm not going to talk much about this. Instead, I'm just going to focus on the Nacimiento member. And there's been a lot of debate as to what the precise age of these rocks are. And they do contain dinosaur fossils, and I'll get to that. But there's kind of three possibilities here. That the Nacimiento is significantly older than the boundary. So then we wouldn't have a latest Cretaceous dinosaur fauna, but still be important. It's somewhere in between the Campanian and the end of the Cretaceous. There's been one person in particular, Dr. Jim Fassett, who's argued vociferously that the Nacimiento is Paleocene in age. I'm not going to really entertain that very much. Let's just say very, very few people have bought into this idea, and I can talk more about that later if you want. The other is the Nacimiento member at least approaches the age, the end of the Cretaceous. And so how do we determine this? Well, there's several different techniques that we can look at to decide what the age of the Nacimiento is. One is using biostratigraphy. You know, what kinds of animals are found in this, and are they animals or plants restricted to the end of the Cretaceous? We can look at the paleomagnetics. So we know the Earth's magnetic field occasionally flips, and we can use those reversal intervals as kind of timelines to help determine the age of the strata that we're in and the polarity of the sediments. We can also use radioisotopic dating. And in particular, that seems to be the best technique that we found to get precise ages for any strata. Unfortunately, we never found any volcanic ashes in the Nacimiento member, but they're quite common in the overlying Nacimiento Formation, which contains the Paleocene mammals. So I'm kind of tired of hearing about the Hell Creek Formation because Tyler said 138 skeletons in his field area. I think in the 40 or 50 years of collecting that has gone into our museum, there's probably fewer than about 20. So, and this is one of them. This is a partial associated dinosaur skeleton. This is a duckbill dinosaur that was collected in the early 80s. One of the very few associated skeletons. So we know at least that these fossils aren't reworked. And this happens to be part of a duckbill dinosaur. And we're pretty sure, based on features of the scapula, which is that elongate bone on the left, the upper left, and the pubis, part of the pelvis, that this is a Lamiasaurian, so a crested duckbill dinosaur. Crested duckbill dinosaurs, as far as I know, are not known from the Hell Creek Formation. And this is a little more convincing, I think. This is an isolated humerus, and it shows a really enlarged deltopectoral crest, which is something that's pretty diagnostic of a Lambeosaurian hadrosaur. So another example of a crested duckbill dinosaur out of the Nacimiento. We also know that there's at least two different kinds of Ankylosaurs. I'm not an Ankylosaur expert, but people claim to be able to distinguish these from known Cretaceous Ankylosaurs in the northern Great Plains by differences in the histology. Edmontonia australis on the left and Glyptodonopelta mimus on the right. One's an Ankylosaur and one's a nodosaur. So we also have abundant ceratopsian material. But we've never found anything that looks at all like Triceratops. Instead, we have, it's very large. It has a very large frill. And it has been named as a distinct taxon, Ohoceratops. But we've never found any, relatively complete skull. So a lot of this has been kind of, it's a composite taxon, I think, maybe. We have a large theropod, a large Tyrannosaurid. This is mostly based on isolated teeth, though we do have some isolated postcranial bones. The one on the left is a complete tooth, including the root. I collected this, I accidentally put a pickaxe through it when I was collecting it, and it was found right next to a tibia. So possibly that's an associated specimen, but we haven't found more of that particular animal. And on the right is probably a shed tooth. It's extremely large. Typically, we don't like to assign isolated theropod teeth to any particular taxon, but this is just so much larger than any other theropod. And we know we have T-Rex from other parts of New Mexico from about the same time. So I think it's logical to think that this is probably Tyrannosaurus rex. And we have Alamosaurus. So in case you didn't know, Alamosaurus is not named after the Alamo of Texas. It actually is named after Alamo Wash, which is in the San Juan Basin. And this is where it was first described. It was found in 1924. This is another associated specimen. It consists of a foot. Very rare to find for titanosaurs, you know. And Alamosaurus is one of the largest dinosaurs. I mean, it approaches the size of like Argentinosaurus from South America. So very, very big dinosaur. And we also have a microfauna. So we go in and collect large concentrations of rock, or we collect samples of rock that contain concentrations of small bones. And this is kind of challenging in this area because this is within a wilderness area. So everything that we collect, we have to haul out, sometimes several miles. So not very many of these types of sites, but these are very important for finding the smaller animals, the smaller vertebrate animals. And we take these samples with us back down to Albuquerque because there's really not that much water that we can use up in the basin. And we screen wash these things usually in stock tanks, and then we pick the concentrate under microscopes to find the little teeth, bone fragments of animals that we can then identify, hopefully. And we have found things like small-toothed dinosaurs. These are just of small-toothed theropod dinosaurs. This is a species of probably Troodon, which I mean, these types of fossils you normally wouldn't find on the surface. They're typically too small to see, or very difficult to see. So we know that there's at least a small-toothed theropod. There's actually at least two other kinds that we've discovered. And these appear, at least the Troodon, appears to be different than what you see in the Hell Creek. It's quite a bit larger than what you see up in the northern Great Plains. And maybe more importantly, at least from my standpoint, is we have mammals. Not very many specimens, but two seem to be particularly abundant in these sites. One is on the left, and those are isolated teeth. They're lower teeth of a small mammal, and look at the scale bar. So we're talking pretty small, like barely longer than about a millimeter. On the left is a Metatherian. It's a close relative to modern marsupials. And on the right, those are isolated teeth of what's called a multituberculate. It's an animal that looks superficially like a rodent, but it belongs to an extinct order, so not closely related to living mammals. But they were quite abundant during the Cretaceous and the Paleogene. These are mammals that we can identify, and they are also present up in the northern Great Plains. I mean, we have a very large assemblage of mammals known from the northern Great Plains and the Hell Creek. And you also find Glaspius and Asonodon, and actually those two taxa are restricted to just the last part of the Hell Creek Formation. So probably an age diagnostic fossils here. Part of our group includes Matt Heisler. He works at the New Mexico Geochronology Lab, and he's collected just a couple tiny crystals. They're probably reworked that he's recovered from siltstones or sandstones. And these are of igneous minerals that he can date radioisotopically. And he has determined that these are about 66.8 million years old. But since these are reworked crystals, it suggests that the deposits are probably younger than that. So these at least constrain the age. They show that these rocks are not any older than 66.8 million years. The Paleomag shows that most of the strata that at least have the fossils in are in a reversed interval. And this is important because the interval that contains the Cretaceous Tertiary or Paleogene boundary is within a reversed paleomagnetic zone. And that supports the idea that these are latest Cretaceous in age. So combine that with the radiometric date. I think this is really strong evidence, as well as the biostratigraphic information, latest Cretaceous dinosaur fauna outside of the northern Great Plains. So this is our interpretation. We show here the Nacimiento maybe extending lower into Cron 30 normal. We don't know, but it's probably a condensed section. So it's possible that some of the fauna does represent, parts of not latest, but pretty close to the latest. And interestingly, if you look at this represented this way, the strata in the San Juan Basin, we have these clastic wedges that occur as the sea transgresses and regresses. Then there's a distinct hiatus separating the fruitland and kirtland formations that contain the diverse Campanian-age faunas we have in New Mexico. And then there's the little Nacimiento member just up there by itself, right at the end of the Cretaceous. So there's a big hiatus separating it from the rest, the lower part of the Cretaceous section. And then I don't show the Paleogene strata above that, which are, again, quite extensive. So what's the take-home message here? Well, it's interesting. We have a relatively diverse fauna from the Hell Creek Formation, and not a bad fauna from New Mexico. The red represents Triceratops, which appears to be restricted to the northern part of North America. Some taxa appear to be relatively cosmopolitan. So even though I haven't shown the huge assemblage of mammals, we have at least two that are found both in these northern and southern locales. Tyrannosaurus rex appears to be quite cosmopolitan, widespread throughout the western interior. But look at down in New Mexico, even though we don't have a very large record, virtually everything that we have that we can identify to some extent appears to be endemic. That's interesting. So what's the separation between these two faunas? It's actually only about 1,000 kilometers. That's only a little over 600 miles. So we don't understand why there would be such a huge amount of provinciality, but it's actually something we also see in older Campanian-age faunas. And perhaps the coolest take-home message of all is that Tyrannosaurus rex was preying upon giant titanosaurs right at the end of the Cretaceous. So I'm going to end my talk with that, except for acknowledging the help of lots of people and the BLM and funding groups. So be happy to entertain any questions.
Just a quick one. About 3 back, you showed the, one more. You seem to have Triceratops on top and bottom.
So that thing, they're ceratopsians, and so there's a limited amount of kind of profiles that I had. So Triceratops is the one in red up above. We have a ceratopsian in the south, but it's a different taxon. It's Ojo Ceratops. The other one next to Triceratops is Torosaurus. That's it.
You mentioned the difference. So you have a difference of two populations, 600 miles separated, but I see water in between them.
Yeah, well, the paleogeographic map, I don't think those Hell Creek dinosaurs were living in the ocean. That's the paleogeographic map I had available. So, but that's approximately the area. But obviously it was dry land when the dinosaurs were there. So the sea...
That inland sea wasn't there at that time?
Yeah, not in that precise locality.
What is the difference in elevation?
They probably are similar in elevation. It's possible that the Hell Creek was probably closer to sea level. The New Mexico site's probably more inland and possibly a little higher in elevation, but probably not radically different. But we don't really know. We don't know what the elevation was. I mean, now the Salem Basin's over 6,000 feet in elevation. It wasn't anything like that. It was a few hundred feet above sea level, probably.
What evidence is there that Tyrannosaurs preyed on Titanosaurs?
They were both together at the same time. I am assuming that Tyrannosaurus is an active predator, and it was there.
So there's no like direct.
No, we haven't found any T-Rex teeth embedded in Alamosaurus bones or anything like that. So.
Since you shied away from the Paleocene, can you just give a quick summary about what you're learning about the evolution of mammals right after the dawn?
Yeah, what we're learning from the Paleocene side of the section, it's similar to what Tyler and others have found up in the Denver Basin. Mammals were evolving very fast. In the San Juan Basin, we have a gap. We don't have the very earliest survivors preserved. We just don't have fossils in the earliest Paleocene. Our lowest Paleocene fossils occur about 500,000 years after the boundary, and by then they're already pretty big. They're similar to what you see in the upper parts of the Denver Basin, where you have 100-pound mammals and quite diverse. So they're evolving very, very fast. We do have a flora from that gap, so it's not like we don't have any fossils, but we don't have any plant fossils from the Nacimiento, unfortunately. We don't have pollen or leaves from that unit, so it's very frustrating, but it's what it is.
Well, if we don't have any more questions, let's thank Dr. Ward very much.